Welcome to the BlockTime podcast, produced by Riot Platforms, where we discuss all things related to Bitcoin, Bitcoin mining, and energy. Today, we're excited to be joined by Robert Warren. Robert, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, a lot of people might know you by your extremely savvy presence on Twitter.
Thank you.
But you work here at Riot. What's your official title?
I do. So I'm the manager of mining projects and operations analysis.
Awesome. And you joined a year ago now?
Yeah, kind of mid-year last year. So have officially passed the 6-month mark, and it's been a long 10 years in these 6 months.
Yeah, I bet. But first, let's rewind and kind of get your biography of what your background is and how you ended up in Bitcoin mining.
Amazing. So I originally got into the space in 2016, 2017. I was living in New Orleans, and I was running a startup at the time, scaling it up, and it was one of those things where I found it, thought it was kind of a curiosity, thought it was interesting. Being in the startup space, I really think at the time I thought there was only maybe 2 reasons why people got into Bitcoin, where they either had to, so it was had some utility for them, or they were greedy. Number go up.
Yeah.
And I was definitely in the latter. I was like, oh, this is great, cool. Like, I'll buy this thing and I'll custody it. I kind of grok that really quickly, buy it, get it off an exchange, don't hold it somewhere weird, custody it yourself. And was busy with the other startups, so kind of, went by the wayside, 17, 18, still bought a little bit here and there, but thought of it as an asset, didn't really understand it as a network, kind of a living, breathing thing. And then 2019, 2020, at that point in time, had relocated up to Colorado and decided to make the jump, again, kind of rediscovering Bitcoin, again, not just as an asset, but as a network, that this was a place that I wanted to be professionally. So took the jump to work in the space full time, was producing some content for Bitcoin Magazine, jumped on and worked with a company called Upstream Data that does predominantly in the oil field side, a lot of containerized solutions, sort of oil field mining, these like up to megawatt plus size containers. And way led on to way, that was on a contract, had made that jump into Bitcoin, was very happy to be kind of working in the space full time, aligning your ideology, the things you care about with your professional work. And an opportunity came up with Riot, and it was incredibly excited to jump on and have been having a blast since.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you were in Colorado, you still live in Colorado.
That's right. Yeah.
And so we're happy to have you here in Round Rock, Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And what made you move from New Orleans to Colorado?
It was a girl, Pierre.
Yes. Yes, you.
So I met my now wife about 3 months prior to her getting a job back up home where she grew up, which was in the city of Denver. She grew up. And she actually moved to New Orleans because she'd been teaching in France for a couple of years previously, had loved it, and obviously New Orleans, rich French history, wound up in schools there, had been working with some of the programming with the French schools there. She had been there almost 8 years. I had been there almost 10 years, and we met in her last 3 months, at which point she promptly moved to Denver to continue her career up there. And at the time I was shutting down a startup, I said, it's been very nice to know you, but 3 months is, it seems a little bit shy. Way leads on to way. 3 months later, I'm calling her saying, hey, I'm in love with you. What should we do? And now I live in Denver, have a house and a baby, and that's kind of how the story goes.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
The house or the baby or all the above?
I think number 1, the baby, number 2, the wife, number 3, the house.
I think that works. I keep everybody. Yeah,
I think so.
It's all blessings. It's all it's a beautiful place to be. But that's kind of how I wound up in Colorado, and I can tell you Mardi Gras is not as good.
Yeah, but there's some good skiing up there, and there's also great electrical equipment manufacturing going on.
There is ESS Metron, very very talented company that builds some really incredible heavy industrial stuff that is really the infrastructure of the modern world. That has immense amounts of manpower and thinking put into it. And I've been to ESS Metron's facilities. I've had the pleasure of kind of walking around and meeting the folks, and just the brain trust that you have there, making stuff that to most people in the modern world is entirely invisible. is wild, absolutely wild, because they're making these huge powerhouses, all this sort of electrical apparatus, the stuff that you don't think about, but we're connected to now in this very studio. Anywhere you go in the U.S., if you're connected to the grid, you're connected to some aspect of this giant machine that is providing power to all of modernity.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot lately of how hidden electricity is from us.
Yeah.
One is that if you just look at a live wire, you don't see the electricity on it.
Yeah.
Two is that then they'll put that live wire into a conduit or behind the wall so that like nobody can mess with it and electrocute themselves. It's great safety. And then three, they'll move it out of sight, out of mind, right?
That's right.
Now, conversely, whenever we're driving, we always see power lines everywhere. Now I just notice them. I'm like, hey, that's a nice one. That looks pretty heavy duty.
Looks high voltage.
Yeah, 138 kV right there. Very nice.
Do you admire substations too?
Yes,
Okay,
substation enjoyer. Yes.
I've done the same thing. I've noticed substations everywhere I go now.
Oh, that's perfect.
Like, that's a long bus bar. I wonder what they're up to over there.
How big that transformer is.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can tap into that one.
Yeah, exactly.
It's inconceivable.
Is there any land for sale around here?
You put a couple of huts on that.
Yeah. So that's great. What was it like working at Upstream? I mean, I admire Steve Barber a lot.
It was my first introduction to working full time in the space, and what's most interesting, and I think this is maybe an underappreciated aspect of our entire industry, is that everyone is a startup. And what you are seeing right now in terms of operators, even though we're at all scales, right? You can go all the way down to Scott with the BitAxe project, and you can go to Rick from Crypto Cloaks, who's prototyping home heaters. You can go up to what Bob Burnett is doing with his sort of like distributed horse theory of mining. If you've ever heard this, you can look at what Eric is doing at Gridless Compute, and you can look at what we're doing at Riot. And because we're so used to seeing like robust, mature industries, we're used to kind of parsing it based on, oh, well, maybe the largest or the most competent or somebody owns this sector or this aspect of the entire industry, the total addressable market. But that's really not the case for us. What really is the case for us is that we're all very much in a Wild West. And I think that was my first introduction to the fact that it wasn't just a Wild West in terms of the technology and the innovation that people were introducing to the market, that we were having to kind of, do it live, so to speak. But it was also the fact that we're having to educate all of our customers. And this is something that I don't think people kind of grok naturally, especially if you're already, turbo orange pilled or Bitcoin pilled and you've been in the space for a while, and to you it seems second nature. When you have to go back to brass tacks and sell somebody something or sell somebody on something, that very much changes the conversation, because now all of a sudden it's, okay, well, you're going to take this generator in this Bitcoin mine, you're going to put it next to your oil well, and it's going to consume your vent or flare natural gas, and you can now monetize your stranded assets. That doesn't read for a guy who's 75 years old, has been doing this since he was in his 20s or 30s. To him, it's, can I connect with a pipeline? What's the cost of transporting it? It's about the engineering surveys. What the hell is a Bitcoin? You want to do what on my site? The local government schemes have no idea how to account for these things. Are they data centers? Are they volatiles? Are they dangerous? It's a gen set, but is it a primary gen? How do I fit it into my schema? We're having to educate the entire industry, and I think that's one thing that I really learned to appreciate jumping on with Upstream, that we are all very much startups.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if we look at history, right, like every new industry, look at the Wright brothers. Like, they got their plane to fly.
Yeah.
And it was like an aha moment of, oh, okay, we can do this. And I would liken that to Satoshi on his Pentium 4, mining 50 Bitcoin
That's right.
every 10 minutes,
Yeah.
And then from there, you kind of have a proliferation of different approaches.
That's right.
And I remember, I forget what movie it is, but they had maybe 100 video clips of people trying different airplane designs, after the Wright brothers.
Yep.
And some of the, just complete flops, some of them actually pretty good, but it wasn't a 747.
No.
And that's, I think that the experimentation phase, the trying to find and then also, like, I don't think the Wright brothers ever conceived of a helicopter, right? So there's like things where I agree, we're not a mature industry like a lot of modern industries where something was discovered a long time ago. Apple, they had computers made out of wood in a garage, right?
Yeah.
And so that's we're not there. I think we're a little bit after that, but
Yes.
we're still in pretty early times.
That's very true. The one thing that I think that we have started to sort out was that it's interesting because we very rapidly converged on a certain footprint of a mining machine, which is unique, right? Because we had this kind of very quick evolution from CPUs to then GPUs. And if you look back in the old Bitcoin Talk forums, you can see Slush, who launched what was Slush Pool, what is now Brains Pool, in his original post where he's talking about the launch of his pool. The reason he is saying that this is a good idea is because you'd had this technological jump with people using GPUs to mine with. And so all of a sudden, all these CPU miners were SOL and they weren't able to mine blocks anymore. So they said, wait a second, let's work together. Let's combine the hash power. And it's interesting because we jumped from CPUs to GPUs. We had this sort of very brief stint in FPGAs that kind of never really took on. And I think I've maybe met one person in my 7 years in the space who has ever run FPGAs, and he was running data centers at the time. So that was a very bizarre kind of thing to learn about. And then all of a sudden, the ASIC with the Avalon miner, the ASIC exploded, and then we had the S9 come to fore as this like brilliant machine. Obviously, we had iterations before. Then we had the S19. Then we have the What's Miner series that's kind of obviously based on the original kind of S9 footprint style. But it's interesting because we very rapidly hit this footprint that people use and they think of in terms of an air-cooled miner. And it's almost that we're trying to refine those mechanisms, right? We're no longer, maybe, we're getting there with immersion in some sense. We're getting there with hydro because that's a very different footprint. It's curious to me to think about maybe that's happening now in the business space where we're having the Cambrian explosion of businesses. We're having the Cambrian explosion of ways to consume electricity where we've already kind of set some of those principles up in the physical ASIC. And maybe those are kind of the shoulders that we stand on, right, technologically to say, oh, well, now let's go play with it in the world and see what 100 different types or styles of businesses can actually look like in this space.
Yeah. I feel like you listed the success path. And then there's
not
also
the failure path.
Well, you've got Butterfly Labs.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Fried Cat.
I've never even seen those.
And then there was the 21 little USB miner.
Okay,
right?
the sticks. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it is fascinating. It's certainly not over either.
No.
We're hearing about new ideas, new manufacturers.
That's right.
Almost every year. So in traditional data centers or like servers, they've got like rack system, 1U, 2U, right? It's interesting that Bitcoin mining did not adopt that footprint.
Bizarre.
Yeah, we went to this tower, which is kind of old PC, like beige almost, just without the box around it.
That's right.
It's just more of a. But is it because there were a lot of individual buyers who were doing that, or?
I don't know. I had a conversation with Bob Burnett, and his part of his introduction into Bitcoin mining was that they became a distributor for the Bitfury systems, and Bitfury had a setup that was native to kind of a rack server. But there is this bizarre disconnect, right? This bizarre disconnect is that we have, at present, very advanced data center technology. If you want to build a data center, there's platforms, there's standards, there's ways in which you set up the racking, there's ways in which you set up your cooling they kind of have the playing field. They know what the playing field looks like. And so we had that in some sense with Bitfury as a manufacturer. I really don't know why MicroBT and Bitmain didn't adopt that standard. It could have been one of these artifacts of history that we would have to learn Chinese to really understand, who was hired at the time that made that decision. But everything on the surface doesn't necessarily seem optimal, right? Because you were designing the machine, but you weren't necessarily designing for the facility that would go into. And we have to think of those as the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the facility was very different, right?
That's right.
Maybe
yeah,
buy a hydro dam in China that has never had a Facebook data center or
That's
AWS
right.
data center. It's just
a TikTok data center.
It's just a TikTok data center. And yeah, it's also like the size of it is it's kind of a human could pick it up.
Yes.
Whereas like anything bigger, then you need two people to
Yeah.
pick it up, and so maybe that's the constraint on the size
It's
and
whether
weight.
you can lift it.
Yeah, yeah,
It is funny in that sense. It's kind of human centered. It one thing that always struck me about, we have this device who I'm not gonna personify too hard. That it's air cooled, right? It needs to be air cooled, which means that it has to have these powerful fans that draw a certain CFM of air that move through a certain kind of arrangement of cooling fins that then gets spit out the back. And so we've chosen this platform that, to me, I kind of can't square why it's built with that footprint, because in my mind, I kind of imagine if you're trying to optimize airflow through something, what fields are we familiar with or kind of analogs to the optimization of airflow? You think something like a jet engine or flight, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be really concerned with the shapes of things. You have to be very concerned with the fluid dynamics of how things move through things. And I have this vision in my head of, strapping oversized S19s to the bottom of a 787 and imagining that being used as kind of the method of powering a plane through the air. And it's ridiculous to even envision, right? It's stupid because the S19 is just like it's like the nose of an F-150 hitting the air coming into it. There's nothing about it says sleek or sexy or aerodynamic. And so I can't square why nobody thought to round things a little bit. Nobody thought to design it with some kind of inlet scoop or something like this. To me, it seems like there are all these opportunities where you can improve upon the fluid dynamics of the air passing through a machine just by changing the way it's manufactured. Yeah. But again, is that a function of us being so early in the industry? Is it the case where all of their research and development goes into making 3-nanometer chips and that's where all the money is? Because if that's where the money is, heck, just throw more fans on it. We're going to dump $100 million, $200 million into manufacturing a smaller, more efficient chip.
Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, maybe as we reach kind of the end of the low-hanging fruit on the chip level, then they'll start thinking about further out on the system.
The shape.
Yeah, aerodynamics.
But who knows? You look at, if you look into the physics of it, right? If you look into... you can compare the cooling functions of various cooling methodologies on the heat transfer coefficient of that method, right? And that's contingent on various sort of physical aspects of the system, right? The heat of the thing that's producing heat, which is the chip, the characteristics of your cooling plate or your fins or that surface, the physical surface, the characteristics of the fluid moving over it. So for our purposes, it's air as a fluid, it's immersion oil as a fluid. For other folks, it's water as a fluid for hydro setups. When you start to look at it in that way, it's really interesting to consider how much there's left to go in that sort of sense, because you get kind of this log improvement of cooling efficiency when you go from air to immersion. But there's just so much left. There's so much juice to squeeze out of it. And that to me is what's going to be very interesting to see, kind of the incremental improvements, because it kind of feels like we're in that part of the industry right now where we're now going to be squeezing out another 10% every year, another 15% every year. We're no longer going to see a 3x in terms of efficiency or operating power or cooling efficiency. Now we're kind of playing at the margins again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I think, though, that as the Bitcoin price increases, it throws a wrench into perhaps kind of those optimizations.
That's right.
In the sense that now people are kind of in that gold rush mentality.
They turn it back on.
Optimizing.
Yeah. That is really. I'm curious if you have any inclinations about where that is going to go, because it seems to me that you got two competing forces, right? You've got the innovation that's happening in the efficiency of the machine, which is like the way that we consume the energy. And so the consumption of the energy is fundamentally, it comes down to the efficiency of the machine. How many watts can you squeeze into how many terahash of work, right? But then on the other side, on the business side of things, you have this other game that we're playing, which is how do you start to explore a marketplace? So what are the various opportunities where energy is a liability to the producer or to the owner of a resource? And we are nowhere near optimizing either side of that equation. And I kind of feel like there's going to be cases where, there's guys in the oil field right now that still use S9s.
Yeah.
And they don't care because it's consumable to them. It's $100 or $80 en masse. I need to consume load. I need to get rid of resources because I've got this gas that's coming out of the ground. I'm going to get docked to all get out if I vent it, and a satellite happens to see me throwing all this methane into the atmosphere. We're playing on these two sides of the industry, so to speak, which is the technological advancement, how much we can get out of every single watt of energy. But then on the other side, we still have this green field of, wait a second, there are still places where energy is priced consistently negatively because it is a liability to the producer. I have a sense that it could take a long time for that market to mature. I don't know if you have the same sense or if you're seeing the same kinds of things. I'm curious what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah. So one of the more shocking moments, no pun intended, of learning about electricity was when I heard that there's a piece of equipment that is just to consume electricity. It's just called a load.
Oh, like on boats.
Yeah, and it doesn't do anything.
That's right.
Other than consume electricity, because for whatever reason, you need something that just consumes electricity.
That's right.
And it's just like a box called a load.
Yep.
That you plug it in. And that's when I saw that, I was like, okay, well, there's so much untapped potential on that end of free electricity that I don't think it fits into a lot of the criticisms of Bitcoin mining. Like, they can't conceive of the idea that there's electricity out there.
That's right. It's not being used.
Yes. And that it needs to be used.
That's right.
And so that's where you get into the negative power pricing. So, but yeah, that barbell also does make sense that you have that extreme. And then you kind of have what I would consider to be from like a grid level power systems engineering of, okay, you might need a load out in the oil field, but you also might need a load at the grid level, at a macro level. So it's kind of just micro versus macro. And the rate of return might be the same on both, right?
That's
They're
right.
just different business activities.
That's something that I think is also hard for people to grok because they are so used to hearing some of the vanity metrics in the mining space. Who has the biggest site? Who has the most efficient chip? Who's got the machine that consumes the most energy? That they don't think about the real world problem that's being solved by something as simple as a load. And it's invisible to us. Like, to hearken to what you were saying initially about, you look at the wires on a high voltage set of lines, and hundreds of kVA doesn't mean anything to somebody. It doesn't, because there's not a conceivable way where you can kind of visualize or see immediately in front of you the difference between the plug in your wall and those high tension lines that are pulling power across states to get to you. And for that reason, it's very hard for people to conceptualize that there are inefficiencies at every level of the grid. But almost 2/3 of all energy that we are even using to produce or pulling out of the earth or pulling from energy resources is wasted as heat. And it's interesting because we have to. It's almost like we have to explain it in a different way.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of go back to the first principles of what we're doing, or like what a load is, and then actually teach people how the world around them works. They have to learn that energy comes from sources of raw materials, whatever that might be, goes through some form of generation, whatever that might be, and then lives on this thing called a grid, which is its own set of problems, that is now sort of a quasi-governmental entity where you have private generators that are bidding on a market that is FERC regulated, that has a grid operator who has a mandate to the community that they operate within to provide consistent and affordable energy. They don't understand that there's not just an entire physical apparatus behind this, but there's an entire financial apparatus around this of buying and selling and trading and consuming energy amongst various actors. So I think, well, I could segue us into some exciting stuff, but that's something that, to me, I think people need to kind of grok before they can really understand the beauty of what we're doing at any scale in Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. So that reminded me of it used to be the case that people thought electricity would be so abundant it would be too cheap to meter, was the kind of the saying, like maybe a century ago now.
Really?
Right?
Okay.
And I think it was the excitement of this new form of energy that was growing so rapidly that it led to kind of this abundance mentality, which I think is actually very healthy. I think
Yes.
that's how, that's kind of the accelerationist type like mindset.
Are you a
right?
big accelerationist?
I admire them, but
Are you a human flourishing maximalist?
I don't know. I don't know what I would call myself other than because to me then it veers into theology when they start.
Then it
talking
becomes
about
very difficult.
Yeah. And we can't discuss it on the company podcast. But
There you go.
but now I feel like society has gone into the scarcity mentality
Wild.
of we have so little energy. We can't waste it on anything.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre, complete 180.
And where does it, is it authentic? Where is it coming from? Because in my mind, I think there's the sort of climate theology does a disservice to itself by not reverting to the engineering in a lot of ways. Because it very much does seem like it's sort of this raw ideology. You've got folks that are gluing themselves to NASCAR tracks in the name of just stopping oil. But the largest producer of atmospheric carbon by all measures is China, who has greenlit and built more coal plants than every other nation combined. But it's only certain Western nations that are taking this thing very, very seriously and have had this adoption of this scarcity mindset. It is bizarre to me. It is bizarre. I can't understand kind of the nucleus of it. And then you get these sort of competing ideas about what the best resolution of that problem is. And so people say, well, we have to take charge and be responsible for our carbon. But if you measure your personal carbon against industrially consumed or produced carbon, it's almost negligible. It's kind of ridiculous. So you say, okay, well, we'll just buy Teslas, and that will be my personal responsibility. I won't use the plastic shopping bag. I won't use the straw. I'll use the Tesla. But then you go, well, the state you live in is 40% coal-based, or you're 60% hydrocarbon-based. You really just put it somewhere else in a certain kind of way. And it is interesting because it doesn't seem to me at all motivated by like the core engineering or the core physics of the thing. It seems that it's sort of a set of disparate ideologies that make interesting protests. I don't know. It's kind of
Well, I think
curious what your thought is.
On one hand, there have been legitimate cases of pollution, right?
Oh, 100%. And methane, the growth of methane,
Yeah.
atmospheric methane, and the amount that we have reduced produced atmospherically as a result of fracking and oil and gas production is massive. It's a very real thing. It's something that you should be considerate of.
And even like if we go back to when I was in school, it was like the ozone, and they fixed it. Policy can actually fix real environmental problems. But I think that the other issue is that as we get further and further away from a pre-industrial society, we forget why our ancestors decided to move away from living that pre-industrial rural life to accepting the cost of industrialization and pollution in order to acquire the benefit of an elevated standard of living.
That's right.
And so now we sometimes in the discourse we just focus on the costs without ever mentioning any of the benefits associated with the activity.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, have you ever read Vaclav Smil's book, Energy and Civilization?
I think I read the back cover, and then I started reading it. And
it's
I need
immense.
to get back into it.
It's immense.
Yeah.
It illustrates that exact point.
Yeah.
In the beginning of it. And the crazy thing is that the beginning of the book throws you for a bit of a loop because you think you're going to be learning about energy, and he spends the first 150 pages talking about farming.
Yeah.
And you're like, what the heck is he doing? He's talking about like agrarian societies and hunter-gatherer societies. He illustrates this really beautiful point, which is that when you transition to a society that is more stable in place and is more reliant on farming, you actually wind up, say, producing wheat, which was the predominant grain that is calorically dense but is nutritionally deficient compared to the kinds of things that you could forage. Now, why would a society go to something that was calorically more dense but nutritionally worse for it? It was worse for you physically because there was above and beyond these additional positive externalities that happened as a result of the ability to farm en masse. And all of a sudden you could support these giant populations of people, and you could now have specialization of labor because you wouldn't have to have this diversity of people who were just going through the forest and getting mushrooms and whatever sort of wild legumes they could find. Those were actually healthier and calorically and in terms of their mineral composition and what they were consistent of. That was physically better for you. But the kind of things that happen on the human innovation scale side of things were so beneficial. It's like this 10x better they talk about in tech all the time. You know, your product has to be 10x better for people to really get it.
Yeah.
You got that from the utilization of wheat as a staple food crop because you could get the calories in, and maybe you weren't getting your other minerals, but hey, all of a sudden I can have specialization of labor because people can live in the society that's more centralized and not wandering. And from there, you build on the shoulders of that. And we do live in the society nowadays where we are so stinking spoiled.
We're
it all
so for granted.
Absolutely spoiled. You know, you have the wonders of the microchip at your disposal every single day. You have the wonders of the internal combustion engine at your disposal every single day. You have the wonders of powered flight when you want to go on a vacation. And now what do you hear when people tell stories about taking their teenage kids to different places? Oh, we took our kids to Canada and they were on their phones and they whined the whole time. And okay, I won't dunk on teenagers because teenagers are teenagers, but it illustrates the point. It illustrates that you just don't know. You don't know the history that your society was necessarily built on. And when you do that, you take things for granted. And you start to say these kind of uncanny things like, let's get rid of all of our disliked forms of electrical generation. So let's just stop oil and coal and let's just shut it all down. And we'll just innovate our way through solar or for wind. But you do it at the expense of the stability of the entire system because you don't understand what role these things play on a grid. You don't understand that maybe today we see them as a modern evil, but they are very much a necessary evil if you want to have the continuing of modernity, if you want to continue to live in a modern world. You kind of make odd choices if you don't understand kind of the house you grew up in, so to speak.
Well, it comes full circle to Smeal's book because now people are like, hey, let's get rid of farming. It's bad for the environment. We don't need farming anymore.
What do we do? What do we do instead?
You know, we go to the supermarket and get our food at the supermarket.
That's where it is.
We don't need farming.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You'll just go to the supermarket and that's where you'll get it.
Or we'll import it, right? It's like,
that's right.
Oh, okay, well, so you don't think farming is going on abroad? It's like bizarre.
I love did you see that big innovation they had in long distance shipping boats?
No. Oh, yeah.
Yes. They added these large vertical posts, and then they added these large sail-like things.
I call them wind catchers.
And they were wind catchers, and everybody looked at it and said, it's a sailboat.
Yeah, it's a sailboat.
You can just recreate it.
You recreated the sailboat. Yeah.
So where are we going?
I enjoy sailing though, but
wonderful.
I don't think it should be used for shipping.
Where are we going is the question. Are we going to, do we have to get slapped in the face a little bit trying to remove the legs of the stool that is modernity? You know, can we do it without kind of breaking the entire structure, the entire system of things? Can we do it just enough to remind ourselves that we should actually be looking forward and not backwards? Are you an optimist in that sense?
I am. I think we're already started on the pendulum swinging back.
Yeah.
One way, kind of as just indicators, I was shocked to see who Argentina elected as their president.
Yeah.
And so I think that clearly there's kind of a return towards, hey, let's not take for granted what we've built up over the past couple hundred years of industrial society. But it really, even when I was in school, like it was just a constant drumbeat, and that was school here in the US and in France, of, hey, we need to have degrowth, right? We can't look at the GDP number go up. We want the GDP number to go down. And it sounded nice of like, yeah, let's go to simpler times where we're outside, the air is fresh, right? Freshest air in the world. But they don't connect it to the fact that in this scenario you're not alive. You know, like you starved to death 50
The
years
carbon
ago.
they
Yeah.
reduced was you.
Yes, exactly. So I am very optimistic. I think that also just from a kind of a rhetorical or the zeitgeist perspective, like I don't think that the degrowth agenda is has a positive connotation in the zeitgeist.
Yes.
Where today, like WEF and Davos and the elites are seen with tremendous skepticism. They're not admired. They're not looked up to by the masses per se.
That's right.
So yeah, I'm optimistic. What about yourself? Are you optimistic?
I'm profoundly optimistic. I think what's interesting is that 2019, 2020, and the resultant kind of governmental smackdown, where at least I personally was kind of watching with horror as you were watching the state actively try to modify, direct human behavior through various mechanisms.
6 feet.
Found that I found it so shocking, so kind of brutally offensive to the ideologies that I ascribe to, the kinds of belief structures and the way in which you treat people and the kind of relationship you have to society. I was so brutally offended by this, but I was simultaneously so heartened by what I was seeing in the Bitcoin space. And I heard it repeated by a lot of other folks where this was not necessarily the sense of being battle tested sort of, and then they fight you in Bitcoin. It was very much a realization moment of this is why this is here, is that somebody took the time to construct this really beautiful adversarial network that only exists because of the assumption that at any point in time, if someone wants to take advantage of you in some form of the operation of the protocol, there has to be a check or an incentive that keeps it in place. We had this thing, this Bitcoin thing, and because it was designed for this worst case scenario, for the assumption that was sort of omnium, what is the term? The war of all against all, omnium bellum omnis, or whatever it might be. Because that was the assumption, that was actually the safest place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that incredibly optimistic, that we were standing on the shoulders of these cryptographic giants who had put the time and energy into putting this thing together that was really the groundwork of this adversarial network. And because they had thought of the various ways in which anyone would try to take advantage of you, you could actually reestablish trust. And that's kind of a Bitcoin meme that I'm curious to see unfold in the coming years, this idea of Bitcoin fixes this.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it is often, I think it's said in one way, but I think the truth of it lies in another. It's often said in like Bitcoin fixes this as if, super Bitcoin shows up and he takes a wrench to it and fixes your broken food, or he fixes your broken money or your broken whatever, your broken supply chain. But I think there's actually more subtlety to the argument. I actually think that when you say Bitcoin fixes this, I think it's in contrast to fiat. And I think when we say Bitcoin fixes this, is that it reestablishes what the measuring stick looks like. Because we don't live in a world of a fixed measuring stick. We live in the post-truth world, right? Where they're lying, you're going to react as if they're lying to you, and then they're going to look at you assuming that you know that they're lying to you, so they're going to make their assumptions based on what they think you're lying to them and and it's this infinite regress of just sort of circular BSing to everybody. I think the Bitcoin fixes this meme is actually the reestablishment of something that is fixed, something that is kind of firm and in place and not by fiat. And that's where we get to be optimistic about the world, isn't by this sort of postmodern, well, let's just imagine it was a different way and let's invert all variables and see what kind of, that might work in art school and it might work when it comes to some esoteric rambling or gaining a cult following. But we've seen it doesn't make people very happy in the real world. We need stability. We need things that are fixed and grounded and we can trust because we know that they're firm. And that's kind of where the Bitcoin fixes this meme. I'm excited to see it play out in the world around us because it says, okay, there's people who, if they trust nothing, they can trust this. And they know that because it's built adversarially. It's built on the assumption that you shouldn't trust anybody. And it's maybe a bit silly to kind of think about it in that way, but that to me is, I think, where I kind of see things going and growing, so to speak, and what I'm super optimistic about in the future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in a way, with Bitcoin, like if you're running your own node, you're holding your own keys, mining your own coin, you might like do you trust yourself is kind of what it comes down to on some level. Now with the Bitcoin fixes this, when you mentioned that, it's like fiat broke it, and so in a sense, it's like it's not so much that Bitcoin is fixing something as that we're removing what was breaking it.
Yeah.
Right, which is a little different than usually how we conceptualize it.
You're kind of replanting the fields. It's like regenerative agriculture, right?
Yeah.
You have to rehabilitate the ground before you can actually start growing something that's nutrient rich nutrient rich from it. Yeah.
All right. So I heard a rumor that you've written a book.
Oof. Yes.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Oh my goodness. It's holy smokes, man. It's everybody sounds like a genius in 180 characters.
Yeah.
And then you have to take these
longer.
ideas.
Yeah.
Well, now you can go infinitely, right?
Yeah.
I could tell you I had this idea of, I was really dissatisfied with a lot of the conversation around Bitcoin mining in particular, because I wasn't hearing coherence in the principles that people were articulating so that the broader community could really understand what Bitcoin mining is about, right? Like, what's our kind of raison d'etre? Like, who are we? What do we do? Like, what's our soul? What I was hearing was a lot of, oh, well, we're doing it on oil fields, and oh, we're going to balance the grid, and then you're going to home mine, and you're going to heat yourself. And to the average person who hears that, they're like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is schizophrenic. This doesn't make any sense to me. And I wanted to answer that question. And I thought, okay, well, what's the best way to answer this question? It has to be something a little more long form. Like, let's sit down and write a book. And so I pitched the Bitcoin Magazine, their publishing house, on this. And, very graciously, they said, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Let's do this. So for over half a year at this point, I've been working on a manuscript of a book called The Bitcoin Miner's Almanac. And the goal is to really answer that question, which is what are the core principles, or what is the nucleus from which we are building as an industry? And the method that I've chosen to do that is to start with the machine itself. Reduce everything to the machine. And from the machine, if you understand that every machine fundamentally has 4 parts. It's got a power supply unit, it's got some kind of control board, some kind of brain talking to it, it's got some kind of method of cooling, and it's got some kind of hash board, something that holds these ASIC chips. And when you assemble the machine, you have a final machine that only takes 3 things connected to it to operate. All it needs is connection to the internet, a connection to a source of electricity, and some kind of functioning cooling mechanism. That's it. It's 3 things. I thought that's probably a tighter place to start. If you can explain the machine, the 3 things needed to run it, then you can go out into the world and you can say, okay, what's happening on the Ethernet cord? What is it doing? Mm-hmm. And from there, you get into this really interesting conversation about, okay, what is it doing? It's connected to an ASIC, talking to the brain of a machine. It's hashing. Well, what is hashing? What is proof of work? And then you start to understand, oh, well, this is what it's doing. That's what proof of work means. What's it contributing to? A pool? Can I do it alone? You can kind of explore the world of hashing through that.
Yeah.
And then you go, okay, well, the electrical plug, that's a big one. Well, where does electricity come from? Well, it comes from the plug, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, where does the plug go? Well, it goes to the substation. Where does the substation go? The high voltage lines. Well, where do those go? I don't know. It could be a couple states over. Could be over to a source of generation. And all of a sudden, you're having a conversation about what is a grid? Well, what is a grid? Well, I see solar panels when I drive out to DIA to come fly down to Austin. Is that the grid? Yeah. Well, does that power our stuff? Yeah, kind of. Well, during the day, surely when it's sunny out, not when it's snowing. Now you're talking about, well, what is a grid? What does it consist of? These generators, what do these generators do? Are they all the same? Are they different? And then once you've explained that, you go, okay, well, but I thought we don't always mine on grid. No, we don't. Well, where do we mine? Well, actually, we can go to sources of energy. So we can go to raw resources. We can go to large deposits of oil and gas. We can go to places where energy is stranded, places where energy is wasted, because fundamentally we want to go be the cleanup crew, because that's one of our main inputs. We want to do as much work. We want to contribute as much work as possible to the network, and we want to do it in a way that costs us as little as possible. And to do that, we have to go find where our main input, electricity, but fundamentally energy, whether it's a nuclear rod or a spinning turbine with water or a solar panel that's not connected to the grid, where is that energy a liability to somebody? Where are they wasting it, or they're dissatisfied because they can't make use of what they've generated? And the last one is
trash is another man's treasure.
That's precisely the case. We're dung beetles in a big sense.
Yeah.
And then the next question is the last physical connection, which is cooling. And if you can explain those things, then you don't have to give somebody a business plan. You don't have to give them the roadmap for what it means to mine Bitcoin. You can illustrate it again through the people that are doing it, through the practitioners. So the first section of the book is dedicated to that kind of explanation that I just reviewed. But the second half is all practitioner interviews. So it's literally the voices of people who are operating in the space, these really brilliant folks. And so we talk to the guys at SAS Mining who are doing some hosted mining off of the Itapu Dam down in Paraguay. That's a fascinating story.
Wow. Yeah.
You talk to Charlie Spears, who's doing some off-grid oil and gas mining in Oklahoma. You talk to a kind of alchemist who's a privacy advocate. His incentives are different. You talk to Rick Vanderholst from Crypto Cloaks, who's doing the home heating. He's using something that is typically a sunk cost, which is the cost to heat your home, and he's monetizing the cost to heat your home. Asked our CEO, Jason Less, to participate, so he lays out his theory of what it means for us to be large. What does it mean to operate at scale? And what's interesting is that when you have this preface of here's the machine, here's what it does, here's the basic business model. Your revenues have to exceed your expenses. And here's where the revenues come from. It all of a sudden makes sense why all these people are running around doing these very apparently different things, but they're all doing it in a profitable way. They're all making money. And they're very happy running their space heater. They're very happy running a 1/4 megawatt off of an oil well, or they're very happy like us participating in these very large ancillary services and building these very large sites on a grid, on ERCOT. It starts to make sense because you start to see that it all reduces to the machine, and the machine is doing something very simple. And that was kind of the goal. The goal was, how do I bring coherence to this thing, as opposed to kind of writing the roadmap of here's where we should go, or Bitcoin is Venice, or Bitcoin is a dog, or Bitcoin is the state of California. Whatever. Everyone's looking for the perfect analogy, the perfect example.
Our friend Alan here.
No,
I'm kidding.
But instead of saying it is a thing, right?
Yeah.
Give me the tools. Like if you're gonna make a piece of art, teach me how to work with the oils, and then I'll make something.
Yeah.
In this case, teach me how to use the ASIC, or teach me what the function of the ASIC is, and then let's see what the business plan looks like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So why did you pick that title? It was my favorite. I clued in on.
Was it a good one?
Well, it reminded me of Poor Charlie's Almanac, or is that what it was?
Oh, that's great. That crossed my mind as well.
Okay.
It did kind of cross my mind. It was kicked around originally. If you know, a Kano alchemist is a buddy of mine, big privacy advocate in the space. We were kind of floating around a couple ideas, and that idea came out, and it stuck because you don't want to. Our space can be so obsessed with the next big thing, or the next release, or the next technological innovation. And that's not the goal. The goal is not to say, here's the next big idea, here's the soft war, this novel theory. Like, this is not a novel theory. It's not supposed to be a novel theory.
Describing reality.
It's a synthesis.
Yeah.
And the goal is that, okay, we've been in existence for a certain point in time. It's time that we make coherence out of this Cambrian explosion of technological advancement and business advancement. It's time we make coherence so that we can better educate folks. And so when we try to explain this to a legislator, or we try to explain this to an oil and gas operator, they understand what the heck we're doing. Because until we can do that, we look like a liability to all those operators. Not every grid is happy to have us come and say, oh, can I have 5 megawatts of load? Some of these smaller municipalities have serious issues or have had bad experiences with folks who were kind of wildcatting various substations across the U.S. and were able to get access to 5-10 megawatts. But for their own operational lack of expertise, I've heard horror stories of guys having huge warehouses and not paying their power bill for a couple of months. And when a guy from the city comes to check it out, they throw the door open and there's nothing in there. So sort of cutting bait and running. This is a liability for the person selling you power. And a lot of these small towns don't want to deal with that. They've been burned from not in all cases is it malice or somebody being a bad actor, but
entrepreneurial error.
Yeah, just somebody caught by chance. You know, the vicissitudes of being an entrepreneur. You screw the wrong thing up or you pull the wrong lever and you can nuke your whole company in the first 18 months. You know, it's a lot of things you can do wrong. But we have to educate them. And you don't do that by saying, we're the future. You do that by saying, we've been doing this for over a decade at this point. Here's what we've learned. You know, here's what we know. And that I think was the impetus around the title. And it seems it makes it last a little longer, right? You wanna go to the source documentation. You don't always want to hear the most novel, risky thing that someone's pitching.
Yeah. Is an almanac supposed to be annual, or is it like?
Isn't that the next question? Yeah. Well, the publisher said that they were excited because it meant we could do another edition. You could do a follow-up. I did expressly try to do it in a way where it wouldn't rely too much on particular technology.
Yeah.
In some cases, there's no way to escape it, right? You have to talk about these things. Where I think should we? Well, heck, let's get the first one out first. Like let's have a successful publication of the first book.
Yeah.
But should there be an opportunity to republish again in the future, there's already probably 7 or 8 people that I would love to include that just didn't have the opportunity to, because in that half a year time window of like the planning and the writing of the initial manuscript, these people launched these really interesting products.
Yeah.
So the Bit Axe is a great one.
Yes.
The whole open source like single ASIC miner project is basically brand new. And so I had the pleasure of meeting Scott, who was facilitating it in Nashville a couple of weeks ago. The first thing I said to him was, "Dang, dude! Like, I wish I would know what you were doing. I wish you were 6 months ahead on the timeline, because I could have looped you in on a lot of this stuff. Because what they're doing is very, very creative, right? It's such a unique space at the micro scale. But I hope there will be opportunities. I don't know that it has to be annual, because I think like the Farmer's Almanac, right? You're going to tell me what the precipitation next July will look like.
It's just based on the historical averages, right? It's not.
Yeah. Now, who knows what we can do? I'll just wave my hands in the air and prognosticate wildly on Twitter, and then just delete whatever tweets aren't accurate.
Yeah.
And I'll have 100% accuracy on all future predictions.
Very good. I mean, I think that there's going to be a 2025 almanac as well.
Wow.
But because there are so many innovative projects that are cropping up for Bitcoin mining at every scale, and I'm really I feel like I want to push you towards on the next one, talking to the manufacturers.
Oh my goodness!
About their decisions, and how they think about it, because the cyclicality of this industry must be really brutal, not just for us as miners, but also for the equipment, the mining rigs.
It's a bit of a black box to us, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something that it seems to me that anyone who's been in the space long enough can explain it, but none of us have any firsthand experience with it.
Not in the U.S., at least. I mean, there's maybe a handful now of people.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's been abroad.
Yeah, and it's this bizarre mix of chip development. So, okay, we have really brilliant engineers who are developing chips domestically. I've heard directly from a gentleman by the name of Gary who works at Intel, who was working on the chip project there. That's still in existence, by the way.
Yeah.
Everybody was saying, "Oh, it's been nuked. It hasn't been nuked." He's personally told me that some of the design choices around the Bitmain chips that he has seen are some of the most beautiful elements of chip design he's ever seen in his whole life. That he's like really fascinated and appreciative of the stuff that they've done there. Now, that being said, from the consumer side, we don't necessarily appreciate that because Bitmain as a company is a different thing to work with. You're working with a company that's selling something to you and either servicing it or not servicing it or replacing it, or it has certain operating characteristics. But it's still a black box. Like we don't know the names of these engineers who have been working on this stuff. We don't necessarily know why certain business choices were made. We don't necessarily know why the footprint is designed in the way that it is. We sure as heck don't understand the relationships between the manufacturers and the foundries. That's this entirely other alien landscape, which is, as far as working with a foundry, all people, myself included, seem to really know is that it's sort of like dumping hundreds of millions of dollars to allocate time to have the ability to use this foundry, and you're basically competing with Lockheed Martin and DARPA and NVIDIA to produce these various things, and somehow we're sneaking in with these manufactured units that we've spent however many hundreds of millions of dollars or yen or yuan or whatever it might be to develop the infrastructure of this thing, and you have to get it right because it's not like pushing software where you can just have an error in the code and you can go, oh, we'll patch it, we'll do it correctly. You can't MVP a chip. A chip is, you have to architect essentially the entirety of a mid-sized city from where you put the telephone in Stacy's room, assuming we're using a landline. This is, I guess, a historical example.
This is so dated.
All
How
the way,
old are you, Matt? Yeah.
all the way to where the HVAC system goes in their yard, all the way to where their road goes and their mailman goes and the post office is, and the way that the power is supplied. You have to architect every level of this thing is the equivalent of coming up with a chip. And you can't screw up where the postman is going to go on his route. Otherwise, you kind of nuke the entire city, right?
Yeah.
Like the whole thing doesn't work. So all of that to say that it's still Greek to us. Or I guess Chinese to us. It's all Chinese to us. It's totally alien.
Yeah.
And we don't have any sort of participants that are at scale in the U.S. that can teach us how this thing works or other ways that we could do it.
Yeah, to me, one of the fascinating aspects of Bitcoin mining is that it combines several of the kind of the highest technology industries. So semiconductors, kind of the pinnacle of human civilization, if we think about, from an industrial perspective. And something I found fascinating when I learned this a couple of years ago, power generation, most of the power generation here in Texas is natural gas turbines that are jet engines inside of a building. It's just like when you take off on an airplane. That's how they ramp up their electricity.
I love it.
And Stephen Howell, the CEO of ESS Metron, he told me, he was like, you've arrived as a civilization when you can manufacture a jet engine or a gas turbine.
Yeah.
Because the materials on a chemical. Every aspect of engineering has to come together, just like for semiconductors, for a jet engine to properly function efficiently.
Yeah. And it's literally every piece of the mechanism is an engineered component. Down to I had a buddy who out of college, she went and worked on turbines, particularly turbine fins. Mm-hmm. And the thought always crossed my mind when I was in my 20s. I would always think this gal is brilliant, but this is her job. Like someone hasn't figured this out. Like I didn't understand that it was worth taking some of the smartest minds in engineering and dedicating them solely to the shape of this turbine with these tiny, tiny, tiny little fins that have to go all the way around it, and they're stacked in all these various rows. Taking a single mind to work on a single component of that thing. And she wasn't even working on the material science, right? She wasn't working on what the fin was made out of. That was an entirely different arm of human ingenuity that had to figure out a way that you would generate this component that it could deal with however many G forces trying to constantly tear it apart while it's in the inside of a blast furnace, rotating at however many thousands of RPM. She was literally just modeling the physical shape of this thing on a single device that I am sure had thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of hours of human ingenuity applied to it beforehand. But that really, I like the way that you put it, that it's the pinnacle of human civilization, because there is no MVP. You are now trying to squeeze out at this point very slim marginal gains that have very, very high rates of return on a device that is really the engineering peak of human civilization. Every aspect of it, the bearings inside of it, the material science, the way in which it's composited, and it has to all live inside of a building that instead of going anywhere is just a jet engine that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. And increasingly digital as well. So now they're applying all of that aspect of how to monitor it and all of that using computers.
Do you think, how many years do you think it will take for us? Because conceptually, we are the inverse of a power plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so my assumption is that in 20 years, we will be doing the exact same thing, but instead of coming up with ways to take raw materials that have a certain BTU capacity to them, oil or gas, and trying to squeeze as much electricity as you possibly can out of it, we're at the other side of the wire saying, how do we squeeze as much work out of a given amount of inbound wattage, inbound electricity? Are we going to be doing the same thing in 20 years where we're going to have
yes,
we're going to have
100%.
one team that's dedicated only to the shape of an ASIC fan?
Yes.
And we're going to have the smartest mind out of MIT modeling the fins on the Whatsminer M99 or whatever it might be.
I think so. I mean, look, gas turbines, they started, I think, in the 1930s. And so it's been almost 100 years and obviously there's new models coming out every year, right? So I don't know every year, but probably every 5 years or so. So yeah, absolutely. I think people are going to be still squeezing the last drops out. And it's interesting too, because then, okay, if I say 2140, right, that reminds us that at that point, no new Bitcoin will be getting added. It'll just be transaction fees. And so you'll have a system where, and one of my theses in Bitcoin is that transaction fees are always going to be volatile. And so you'll have the volatility of the revenue with the volatility of the cost, which is the electricity grid, right? With kind of the stability of your load center, of your mining facility.
Yeah.
And you're going to be, it's almost like sometimes when I'm in one of the buildings, I feel like it's a ship that we're collectively steering. I think we're still in the very early nascent stages of those optimizations.
I'm excited for where we're going. It's I went on a bit of a minor rant in Nashville talking about how we were kind of knuckle draggers. We were the Cro-Magnons of the data center space, which is 100% true. But the thing that I think I neglected or just kind of assumed was that this is actually where you need to be right now. And that's what I think is so excited about what we are doing. And I think it's underappreciated for us, particularly as an operator and our strategic choices, is that the externalities of being massive. Everybody sort of considers what is the nameplate exahash of an operator. But I don't think it's fully appreciated the significance of doing that in one place. And it's a very different animal. It's a very different animal to be dealing with hundreds and hundreds of megawatts. And so everything that we do, we are putting so much brain power behind it, and we're putting so much consideration and so much analysis behind it. And we're executing, and we're actually getting this thing done. And I think it's something that, to me, is exciting that I want to forget. I want to make sure we don't forget to continue to celebrate, is by setting these things up, we're the ones who are pushing the event horizon. Like, we're the ones who are actually having the opportunity to show what happens when you build a gigawatt site, because nobody knows. Like, nobody knows. Like, this is the Tesla rocket going up and coming back down. They have the luxury where they can blow stuff up routinely and continue to let rockets kind of drop into the ocean. But we're navigating a path where we want to be as aspirational in terms of the grandness of our vision, but not blow anything up. And this is what's so exciting about what we're doing, is like, we have to be so measured, but the opportunities are so big, and we get to be the ones who kind of chart that path. We get to create what that future looks like. And I don't think it's I don't think it's missed inside of the house, so to speak. I think that, we've got these brilliant engineers and we've these brilliant operations and execution teams. I don't think they take for granted that, but I wish that the broader community really understood how interesting this was, how cool this was, how much of kind of a Wright brother moment this is, and not even just for us, but for everyone who is testing various types of business models. They get to be the first one to do this. Eric Hirschman gets to be the first one to do this in Africa, and to go essentially consume up the capacity factor, the consumption of these various generators that he's partnering with. He gets to introduce this brand new thing. So that's something that to me, I think is maybe underappreciated from the outside, but from the inside is one of the most exciting things about what we're doing, is that everyone gets a little taste of it in our own kind of way, in the way in which we're doing it.
Yeah, and on your point about the Cro-Magnon of data centers, I mean, I see where you're coming from on that. At the same time, we're at the very cutting edge.
It's true.
Of nobody's done immersion at this scale.
That's right.
It's HPC, and it's economical as well, in the sense that a lot of supercomputers are built not because they're going to make a profit.
That's right.
Right, but because in service of science, it's kind of a public good.
The greater good. Yeah.
Yes. This is something else entirely. Of, hey, we're going to have a commercial supercomputer that's 400 megawatts of immersion. It's just never been done before.
That's
and
right.
So in some ways, the data center people are the Cro-Magnons, and we're just taking things to another level. But it's just different applications, right?
That's right.
Like you just don't you don't run a data center at 100% 24/7. Like
Yeah.
that's unheard of.
It's exciting. We'll see where the future goes. I don't know. You don't know. But the opportunities are insane.
If I knew, I would not. I wouldn't work here because it wouldn't be interesting. To me,
you'd be hands on the crystal ball.
pontificating on Twitter.
That's
solely,
right.
So
100%.
only doing that.
Oh,
but,
just 100% just Twitter ad revenue.
Yeah, but because it's interesting because I don't know. I'm like, all right.
That's right.
Like,
that's what keeps us in it.
Yeah.
Because we are the cutting edge. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that. I think that's the elegant way to say it. Because Cro-Magnon, it's that we have to be in this space right now because we are. This is the moment that we live in terms of the machines that are being built, in terms of the scale at which we can access it. People don't appreciate that we're bringing up the manufacturing game as much as we're consuming the manufacturing game, consuming these ASICs and building all these systems. Everyone that we work with has to innovate with us and come to the cutting edge. So maybe in the sense of what the state of the art is for running an AI server, that's standardized. It's almost a known quantity. But for us, we have to be really smart about the choices that we make because we are determining the path in a lot of ways. So I guess what is the fair way to say that? Because simultaneously we are in this moment of kind of we can be better while still being the leading edge, kind of the event horizon.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely no industry that's perfect. Even the most mature industry is continues to innovate. Hopefully, I mean, if they're not, then they're going to get replaced by a different industry. But
that's right.
The other part of it is that not only are we kind of just continuously consuming electricity, 100% as a data center and generating 100% of that heat, but also that I think traditional data centers and people from that world, what is jarring to them is that we don't have any hard drives and we don't have any memory, basically. It's just pure compute.
It's all now.
Yeah. It's instantaneous. You hash it. It's ephemeral. It's interruptible. And that, I think, opens up a different design space.
That's right.
And thus a different set of exploration work where they're like, well, we've already explored this. It's like, yeah, you've explored that, but now...
Only to the extent that they needed to.
Oh, yeah, and to the extent it fit into your use case.
Yeah.
But now we have a different use case. I understand there's overlap. It's electrical, it's electronics, it's compute, but it's just completely, it's a different world.
That's a fantastic point that I've never heard made before.
Yeah.
That actually may not be the best analogy because we're a continuous industry. We're on now.
And I can't think of a similar industry. Hopefully, our listeners will correct me that because even if you look at like
The commenters always know.
yeah, an aluminum plant, right? Like
Yeah.
they will go full throttle 100%, but then they go back to 0%
That's right.
when they're done with that part of the process. So yeah, it's exciting to be on this journey with you, Robert.
You know, I feel the same way.
And with you too, Gabe. Gabe, did you have some questions for Robert?
No, I mean y'all covered such high level stuff. My my questions sound so rudimentary compared to all of that. I mean, I wanted to ask Robert, what does your day-to-day responsibilities look like here at Riot? I know that you've had such an illustrious background in
Illustrious.
different.
Oh my goodness, don't say that.
Well, you just had such a diverse, maybe we'll say that, background in Bitcoin mining, and in that sense, what's the similarities? What's different? What do you do on a day-to-day here at Riot?
That's a big question. Where should I start?
Every day's different, right?
Every
Yeah.
day is different. I mean, honest to goodness, we are moving at 1,000 miles an hour here, and last week was a crazy month, and there are so many people joining, there are so many people scaling up various aspects of the operation. My concern is really keeping coherence in the organization, making sure that we're focused on the optimization of what we're doing, and then again, we have to figure out the best ways to do that. We have to write the rule books in house, and we're having to solve for a problem set that people don't have to solve for. When you are operating at like a home mining scale, you can invest tens of hours into coming up with the perfect boot up and ramp schemes so that you can determine how to squeeze your 18.7 joules per terahash as opposed to your 22.4, and you can go and test 15 different types of firmware, different operating conditions. In some sense, we have to operate on that level. We have to operate with that frame of mind, but we have to do it at such a scale, and we have to do it with a responsibility to the public markets, where you have to be sensitive in the way that you balance all these things, and we have to be learning it together. So that's kind of the problem set that I spend my days kind of most concerned with, is how do we operationally continue to optimize and make sure that we are consistently getting the best performance out of what we're doing, and then analytically, how do we internally stay as educated as possible so that we're always on the leading edge of what we're doing. Nobody has written the rule book for how you come up with various operational or curtailment schemes or participation in the realm of our various ancillary services, but we know it's an incredibly powerful tool. And so contributing to the teams here that are doing that has been, and I hope will continue to be, a lot of the most exciting stuff that we're doing. And I get to work with brilliant and compelling folks that fundamentally ask interesting questions, because we have to go find out. We're in the position to go find out. We have to find out what's the best way that we can optimize and run our immersion systems. What is the variable set that we can concern ourselves with? We have to ask then, okay, well, on the engineering side, what are the various energy sources that we can go take advantage of to be the largest operator in the space and to achieve our macro level goals, which are audacious.
Yeah.
We have absurdly big goals. And that's so exciting because there's so much baked in there that changes the way in which...
looking at the history of how the hash rate has grown globally.
Oh my goodness.
And then saying, hey, we want to add this many exahash.
100 exahash?
Yeah.
100 exahash is an inconceivable amount of compute power.
Historically speaking, yeah.
And it's an inconceivable amount of power consumption. And everything that we do, because of the protocol being proof of work, has to be rooted in the world. Proof of stake can run on a server somewhere, and it can have its own attempt at being, this internal mechanism that self-regulates. It doesn't work, but proof of work fundamentally has to connect to the real world. And that's crazy because we have to live in this 1,000-mile high world while also constantly saying, no, we have to exist in the real space out there. And so you're always operating under all these various constraints of these various industries. Does that kind of answer the question?
Oh yeah, it answered my question for sure. I wanted to bring up the fact that Riot has recently announced that we've completed our expansion project at Rockdale, and we all know that we're building out in Corsicana, building A1's got structural steel up.
Yeah.
So we'll be adding hash rate in this year from Corsicana, but it sounds like you're optimizing Rockdale to run at its peak efficiency. So it's so interesting how we're optimizing what we already have and at the same time building more capacity at the exact same time, right? It's just so focused on that number of exahash.
Yeah, and how do we do that as a team, right?
Yeah, I know that's the other part of my question is you're working on optimization. How many teams and how many different people do you have to touch base with to do that?
Oh my goodness, man.
Like everybody, huh?
Well, I'll preface that. So coming from predominantly working in the startup space and working in a startup space that was in like a much smaller market where, I thought at the time, a company in New Orleans I was running, I scaled up to 14 people. And it was like, man, we got 14 people. We're really kind of big now. I kind of made it. Look at all these jobs. Coming into this public market space. And then all of a sudden having the realization where you have to put a massive effort into continuing the communication and the coordination with various parts of the organization, not just because there are so many parts of an organization, especially a publicly traded organization, but because we're growing so quickly. I was up at the site this morning and yesterday, and I have to always double take because it's like, I haven't been there that long, but I'm already meeting people that have been here less than me, and they're looking at me like, oh, you've been here a while. I'm like, no, dude, I haven't been here a while. Like this place just moves at 1,000 miles an hour.
Now you know how I feel when I joined in November of 2021.
Oh, it's got to be crazy.
It's insane.
It's got to be crazy, but it's
I've met so many talented and brilliant people that work at such a high level. It's so cool.
That's right. And keeping the communication open, I think, is probably something that is most exciting because we have these engineering teams that have to do two very difficult things simultaneously. They have to push the limits on what the state of the art is in terms of scale and operation for all of our future build-outs, while simultaneously they have to be accountable to, in some sense, the function and the optimization of our prior sites. And so you're in this dual space where it's like, okay, if I'm going to build a neighborhood, the first house that I'm going to build is off this great design, but inevitably by the time I get to the 10th house that I build, I've come up with various ways that I'm going to put the water heater here. I know that you need a plug there. I know that you need to put a fan right there. So you learn stuff as you go. That has to all be communicated, not just up the chain when you start talking to all of the various corporate elements that are doing the fundraising or educating investors. You have to communicate it to the folks who come behind and all of these expert teams who are maintaining the buildings themselves, maintaining the operations of the various parts of the building, maintaining the machines within the building, having to service those machines, having to retrofit those machines, having to keep all the various parts of this facility moving. It's absolutely bonkers. If you had an equivalent of something like an F1 team that you were trying to run and you were the Red Bull F1 team, you could have your multi-$100 million budget and you could be creating and innovating, but you would fundamentally only be running one car at a time. And we're not doing that. Every building is its own car. And so we keep building a new car and going, hey, we're going to go from this car to this car, and here's how we optimize it. Hey, we got to go to this car too. Oh, P.S., you have to keep all these cars running. And
make them faster every time.
And make them get progressively faster and make their gas mileage progressively better. And that's an exciting challenge. That's a fun challenge. And it's very, very tough, but we have such a cool opportunity with all these smart people here to do it. And you can feel it. You can kind of feel the level of conversation amongst folks, all the way from our software team to our engineering team to our operation to our research to all the various corporate elements of the business. You can feel the tide rising, which I think is very cool.
I agree. Yeah, I feel that tide.
You feel it.
I feel it.
Ooh.
I feel it too.
Yeah. Pierre, I feel like we've had quite an episode here. We're a little over an hour mark. So do you want to close us out?
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, Rob. This was
Huge
great.
pleasure.
We're going to have to do this again because I feel like we ran out of time. We got more to talk about. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Please share, subscribe, leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast directory. Go check out all of Gabe's videos on YouTube as well. There's not just the podcast on YouTube. There's lots of other videos that highlight team members we have at Riot, our buildings, and the Rockdale community. So,
and a lot of stuff coming out soon too. We got a lot in the pipeline.
Yeah, and updates from Corsicana. So lots of exciting content. Check out our YouTube. CO2 measurements as well for those who are into that. And we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.